They say betrayal comes in many forms, but no one tells you that sometimes it also brings temptation. Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of betrayal, emotional vulnerability, and the consequences of forbidden desire. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. But if you stay, I promise you, this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the human heart. I never thought I'd be sitting here, telling this story. Not like this. But I need to say it out loud, to make sense of it, to hear the truth in my own voice. Maybe then, I'll understand how it all happened. Maybe then, I'll know who I became that night. My name is Natalie Levy. I'm 36 years old. If you had asked me a few months ago, I would have told you I was a good wife. A devoted wife. Someone who built her life on trust, on love, on the promise that marriage meant something unshakable. My husband, Harold, and I had been together for 5 years. We had a life most people would envy, a nice house, a stable routine, and a love I thought was solid. Unbreakable. Mornings were predictable. Harold would wake up first, always before me. I'd hear the sound of the coffee machine humming in the kitchen, the faint clinking of his spoon against the ceramic mug. I'd join him at the table, still wrapped in my robe, hair a mess, half asleep but comforted by the steadiness of our routine. He'd glance at the news on his phone while I absent-mindedly scrolled through emails. No big conversations. Just quiet, easy companionship. Weekends were different. More intentional. We'd go out for dinner, invite friends over, pretend we were still that couple who laughed easily, who never ran out of things to say. And maybe, in those moments, I believed it. Maybe I let myself think we were untouchable. Then there was Rowan. My husband's son from his first marriage. When Harold and I got together, Rowan was just a boy. A quiet, observant kid. He had his mother's sharp features, but Harold's quiet strength. By the time he turned 18, he wasn't just some distant stepchild, I saw him every day. We lived under the same roof. He became part of my routine, part of my home, part of my world. And then one night changed everything. But everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and boundaries shattered in a single night. I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling this story to justify what happened. I'm not looking for sympathy or forgiveness. If you're here to judge me, I won't stop you. Maybe I deserve it. There's a moment in life when everything you believe, everything you trust, just shatters. It doesn't happen slowly. It doesn't come with a warning. 1 second, you're living in your own version of reality, and the next, you're staring at undeniable proof that it was all a lie. I remember the exact moment my world fell apart. It was late. Harold was in the shower, his phone sitting on the nightstand. It wasn't locked, he never locked it. Maybe he was careless, maybe he thought I'd never check. Or maybe, deep down, he wanted to be caught. I don't know what made me look that night. A feeling? A suspicion? Maybe something inside me already knew. My hand shook as I picked up the phone. I told myself I'd just glance. Just a quick look. I wish I hadn't. Messages. Dozens of them. Her name was Daniela Pratt. I clicked. My breath caught in my throat. I scrolled. My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. There were photos. Receipts. Conversations so intimate, so detailed, it made my stomach turn. He told her things he hadn't said to me in years. Called her beautiful. Said he missed her. Talked about the next time they'd see each other. Hotel bookings. A meeting scheduled for next weekend. I couldn't breathe. I don't remember setting the phone down, but suddenly it was there on the bed, screen glowing like a taunt. The water shut off in the bathroom. Footsteps. Harold walked in, towel wrapped around his waist, rubbing his hair dry. I just stared at him. He barely looked at me. Something wrong? The word sat on my tongue, burning. My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to be calm. I wanted to be smart. Instead, my voice came out hoarse, shaking. "Who is Daniela?" The room went still. His hand lowered, towel dropping onto the dresser. He blinked at me, face unreadable. A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, passed through his eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "You went through my phone?" That was his first response. Not an explanation. Not an apology. Just a sharp, accusatory question, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. The anger inside me snapped. "That's all you have to say? I found your messages. Your photos. Your hotel reservations. So don't you dare act like I'm the problem here." His jaw tightened. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I don't want to do this right now, Natalie." But I did. I needed to. "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you been sneaking around with her? Weeks? Months?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know. A while." That hit me like a punch to the gut. A while. Like it was nothing. Like he'd forgotten when he started tearing our marriage apart. "You don't know?" My voice cracked. "You don't even have the decency to lie to me?" That made him snap. "Jesus, Natalie. Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like I'm some kind of monster. Maybe if you weren't so cold all the time, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Silence. A stunned, suffocating silence. Cold. That's what he called me. Everything in me twisted. He cheated on me. Lied to me. Broke every promise he ever made. And somehow, in his mind, it was my fault. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter, raw. "You really want to blame me for this?" He just stared at me. No remorse. No regret. Just exhaustion, like I was the one exhausting him. That was the moment I knew. There was nothing left to save. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned away, grabbed the nearest bottle of wine from the counter, and poured myself a drink. Harold muttered something under his breath, grabbed his keys, and left. I didn't ask where he was going. I didn't care. I just stood there, gripping my glass, staring at the door as it shut behind him. The house felt empty. The wine tasted like nothing. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the darkened television screen. Minutes? Hours? My hands were trembling. My head felt too heavy for my body. Everything inside me felt hollow, like someone had carved me out and left me there, bleeding from the inside. Then, a voice. "You okay?" I turned. "Rowan." He stood in the doorway, watching me. His face was cautious, concerned. I'd almost forgotten he was home. I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just a rough night." He didn't move. Didn't speak for a moment. Then, quietly, "Is it Harold?" That was all it took. The dam broke. I exhaled shakily, rubbing at my temple. "I don't know what to do, Rowan. He's been cheating on me." And when I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He just walked out. Rowan's jaw tightened. What an asshole. I let out a weak laugh. Yeah, he is." He walked over, hesitated for a second, then sat down beside me on the couch. Close, but not too close. Just enough to let me know I wasn't alone. "You don't deserve that," he said. His voice was softer now. Almost careful. I shook my head. "Maybe I do. Maybe I should have seen it coming." "No." His voice was firm. "Don't say that." I looked at him then, really looked at him. Rowan had always been mature for his age. Wiser than most 18-year-olds. He had his father's quiet confidence, but where Harold was cold, Rowan was warm. I don't know what to do, I admitted. He sighed, leaning back against the couch. You don't have to know right now. I nodded. Took another sip of wine. He was right. Maybe I didn't have to figure it all out tonight. Maybe I just needed someone to listen. But I should have stopped myself from speaking so freely. From leaning into him, from noticing the way his eyes never left mine. And I definitely should have ignored the way, for the first time in years, I felt seen. The house felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the weight of what I knew now, what I couldn't unknow. The half-empty wine bottle sat on the coffee table. My glass dangled from my fingertips, nearly forgotten. The dim glow of the kitchen light spilled into the living room, casting long shadows against the walls. I could still smell Harold's cologne on the couch cushions, faint and distant, like a ghost of what our marriage used to be. But Harold wasn't here. Rowan was. He hadn't left my side since I told him. He sat next to me, one leg stretched out, the other bent, his fingers drumming lightly against his knee. I could feel his presence beside me, not just see him, but feel him. The warmth of his body. The quiet, steady way he breathed. I took another sip of wine, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue before swallowing. I must look pathetic right now. Rowan shook his head. You don't. I scoffed, glancing down at myself, bare feet tucked beneath me, hair a mess, eyes puffy from the tears I'd forced myself to stop shedding. I appreciate the lie. It's not a lie, he said, and when I looked at him, his expression was serious. You're hurt. That doesn't make you pathetic. It makes you human. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Maybe it was the softness in his voice. Maybe it was the way his eyes never wavered, never darted away awkwardly like most people's did when faced with someone else's pain. Harold never looked at me like that. Not anymore. I let out a slow breath, leaning my head back against the couch. I keep thinking about it. Over and over. Trying to figure out when it happened. When he stopped wanting me. When I became nothing to him. You were never nothing. His voice was quiet, but firm. I turned my head to look at him again, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt different, charged, uncertain. I should have pulled away then. I should have put distance between us, ended the conversation before it drifted somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. But I didn't. Instead, I held his gaze. Rowan hesitated before reaching out, slow enough that I could have stopped him. His hand found mine, resting lightly over my fingers. Just that. Just a small touch. But it felt bigger than it should have. You deserve better, he said. I swallowed hard. My brain screamed at me to move my hand away, to laugh it off, to do anything but sit there, letting the moment linger. But I didn't move. His palm was warm against mine. Steady. He wasn't a boy anymore. That realization hit me like a slow, creeping tide, something I should have noticed before but never let myself acknowledge. He wasn't a boy. He was a man. And for the first time in a long time I felt seen. Not like an afterthought. Not like a burden. Not like someone to be tolerated. Like a woman. I should have stopped myself from thinking that. From letting the idea take root. But Harold got to have his fun, right? He got to throw away everything we built together for a stranger. A younger woman. A new thrill. What about me? What about my needs? The thought was reckless, dangerous. But it was there now, and no matter how hard I tried to push it down, it wouldn't disappear. Rowan's grip on my hand tightened, just slightly. A hesitation. A question he wasn't asking out loud. I should have pulled away. Instead, I did the opposite. I turned my hand over, curling my fingers around his. A slow exhale left him, like he hadn't realized he was holding his breath. His other hand lifted, just barely, just enough that his fingertips brushed against my knee. The touch was light, fleeting, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. I could have stopped him. I didn't. Rowan. I meant to sound firm, to shut this down, to tell him this wasn't right. But my voice came out softer than I intended. Almost breathless. Almost like an invitation. His eyes flickered to my lips. A hesitation. A moment stretched too long. I've always admired you, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. My pulse pounded. My skin felt hot. The room was too quiet, too small. I could have said something then. I could have laughed, brushed it off, told him he was young and naive and didn't know what he was saying. But I knew that wasn't true. I could see it in his face. This wasn't just some impulse for him. This wasn't meaningless. I wasn't just his father's wife to him. I was me. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't want to be Harold's wife anymore. I just wanted to be wanted. The moment lingered, stretched thin like a wire pulled too tight. I knew if I let it snap, there'd be no turning back. And yet, I didn't let go. Rowan's fingers were still resting against my knee, hesitant but deliberate. His grip on my hand hadn't loosened. His breathing was steady, but I could feel the tension beneath it, like he was waiting for a sign, waiting for me to tell him what this was. A single moment. A thin line drawn in the air between us. If I crossed it, I couldn't go back. I didn't even hesitate. I leaned in. The kiss started as hesitation, a fleeting moment where neither of us fully accepted what was happening. But once our lips met, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just a kiss. It was years of loneliness, of feeling unseen. It was every moment Harold had turned away, every night I had wondered if I was still worth wanting. Rowan didn't pull away. He didn't question it. His hand was warm against mine, his presence steady, as if he understood all the things I couldn't say. He touched my face, his thumb brushing my cheek, and I let my eyes close. The world outside that moment didn't exist, just the quiet, the unspoken emotions hanging between us, the undeniable pull that neither of us could ignore. A slow breath. A second of hesitation. Then, something deeper. A step neither of us could undo. I told myself this was a mistake. That it was nothing more than a reaction to my pain, a reckless way to feel something after so much hurt. But as I looked at him, the weight of what we had done settling in my chest, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about Harold. This was about me. I knew I should stop. I didn't. I let myself fall. I let myself want. And once I did, there was no stopping. There was no turning back. I woke up to silence. The kind that feels heavy, pressing against your chest like a weight you can't move. The kind that makes you hold your breath, afraid that breaking it will make everything real. My head throbbed. My mouth was dry. But none of that compared to the cold, sinking feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to turn over. I didn't want to look. But I felt him before I saw him. Rowan was still there, still in my bed, his body warm beneath the sheets. His breathing was deep and steady, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will myself back into the darkness of sleep. But I couldn't. The reality of what I'd done was too loud, too real, too final. My body ached in ways I hadn't felt in years. My skin was still sensitive where he had touched me. And worst of all, deep down, beneath the guilt, beneath the shame, I knew I didn't regret how it felt. I only regretted what it meant. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake him. The sheets slipped from my shoulders, exposing skin I didn't want to acknowledge. My robe was on the floor, half forgotten, tangled in last night's recklessness. I reached for it, wrapping it tightly around myself, as if that could undo everything. As if covering myself could erase what had happened. It couldn't. I swallowed hard, rubbing my temples. My mind was a mess, my thoughts colliding into each other too fast to process. What had I done? The question rang in my head like an alarm I couldn't shut off. What had I done? The bed shifted behind me. A quiet inhale. A groggy, half-conscious sigh. And then, his voice, rough with sleep. Natalie? I closed my eyes. I couldn't face him. Not yet. Not like this. But I didn't have a choice. I turned, slowly, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Rowan blinked up at me, still caught in that haze between sleep and waking. His hair was messy, his expression soft, unguarded. He looked young in that moment. Too young. Too real. For a second, neither of us spoke. The weight of what we'd done hung in the air, unspoken but suffocating. Then, his lips parted. Last night. I couldn't let him say it. I couldn't let him put words to something I was already trying to bury. It was a mistake. The words left my mouth too quickly. Too sharp. I saw the way his expression flickered, the way his jaw tensed. He sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist. A mistake? I stood up before he could say anything else, tightening my robe around myself like armor. It shouldn't have happened, Rowan. It can't happen again. He didn't respond right away. Just watched me. Studied me. And then, quietly, you don't mean that. I swallowed. Yes, I do. You don't. He shook his head, voice calm but sure. I was there, Natalie. I know what it meant. It didn't mean anything. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. His gaze darkened. Don't do that. Do what? Pretend. I let out a shaky breath, pressing my fingers to my temples. Rowan, I meant it, he said, cutting me off. Last night. Every second of it. Did you? I should have lied again. I should have told him yes, it was just a moment of weakness, nothing more. But my silence said everything. Rowan exhaled, shaking his head. You're just scared. I snapped my gaze to him. Of course I'm scared. Do you even realize what we just did? What this is? His voice softened. I know exactly what it is. I looked away. I couldn't do this. I needed space. Distance. I need a shower, I muttered, turning toward the bathroom. He didn't stop me. He didn't have to. I could still feel him, even as I shut the door behind me. I spent the rest of the morning avoiding him. I told myself it was over. That it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, nothing more. But I felt it every time I looked at him. Every accidental brush of skin when we passed each other. Every glance held a second too long. Every quiet moment where we both knew, without saying a word, that we were lying to ourselves. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. The days after felt strange. Like I was living in a reality that didn't belong to me anymore. Harold was still gone, and a part of me wondered if he would ever come back. But it didn't matter. Even if he did, I wasn't the same woman he left behind. I wish I could say that I woke up the next morning with clarity, with the sudden realization that what I had done was unforgivable, that I needed to put distance between myself and Rowan before it was too late. But that would be a lie. The truth is, I wanted him again. I wanted the way he made me feel. I wanted the way he looked at me, like I was something more than a mistake, more than a wife to be taken for granted. And that scared me more than anything. Because for all the ways I had justified what happened, for all the ways I told myself that Harold had destroyed our marriage first, it didn't change the fact that I had done something I could never undo. I had let my pain turn me into someone I didn't recognize. And that was the real betrayal. I didn't tell Rowan that right away. For days, we moved around each other carefully, as if acknowledging what had happened would make it more real. He didn't push, didn't try to talk about it again. But I could feel it. The weight of it. I caught him watching me sometimes. Not with regret, not with hesitation, but with something else. Something dangerous. Something I wasn't sure I had the strength to resist. And maybe he saw the same thing in me. Because one night, when the silence stretched too long between us, when the air in the house felt too thick, when I knew I should go to bed but didn't, he spoke. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" I didn't turn to look at him. I didn't have to. "You need to go to bed, Rowan." My voice was steady, but inside, I was anything but. A quiet chuckle. "That's not a no." I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the counter. "This can't happen again." "Why?" His voice was soft, careful, but there was an edge to it, like he already knew the answer, and he didn't believe it. I turned to him then. "Because it was wrong." He didn't flinch. "Did it feel wrong?" I hesitated. He took a slow step closer. "Because I can tell you right now, I don't regret it." I felt something inside me break. "I do," I whispered. For the first time, his face changed. I saw something flicker behind his eyes, hurt, confusion, maybe disbelief. "Do you really?" he asked, voice quieter now. I didn't know how to answer. Because part of me did regret it. And part of me didn't. That was the problem. That was why I needed to stop this before it ruined both of us. I shook my head, stepping back. "We can't do this, Rowan. You have your whole life ahead of you. And me." I trailed off, swallowing hard. "I don't even know who I am anymore." He stared at me for a long moment. And then, finally, he nodded. But I could see it in his face. He didn't believe me. And worse, neither did I. I learned something about betrayal. It's not just about the pain. It's not just about the anger, the heartbreak, the feeling of being unwanted. It's about the way it changes you. Harold's affair broke me. But I can't blame him for what I did. He didn't force me into anything. He didn't push me into Rowan's arms. That was me. That was my choice. And that's the hardest part to accept. Because if you had told me a year ago that I would do something like this, I would have laughed in your face. I would have sworn up and down that I was better than that. That I had morals. That I had control. But that's the thing about betrayal. It makes monsters out of the most loyal people. It turns love into something unrecognizable. And now, I have to live with that. This secret will never leave me. And neither will the guilt. Because the hardest part of betrayal isn't the pain, it's realizing how easy it is to become the person you once despised. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. Would you have done things differently? Do you think betrayal justifies betrayal? Or is there never an excuse? And if you don't want to miss more stories like this, ones that challenge you, make you question everything, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones we're too afraid to say out loud.